Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 207 of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography. Oh, I know, promises, promises. I'd said I'd be making a podcast every few weeks, and here it's been a couple of months before I sat here in front of this microphone. Life and travel has gotten in the way, packing up my studio and getting on the road and kind of having no particular locus of living for quite a long time here. But here I am, and I hope you're still out there listening. Hey, raise your hand if you're still out there listening. I'm currently in Cortona, Tuscany, where I'm spending the fall semester again, teaching for a program I've spoken about here on the podcast before, the University of Georgia's Studies Abroad program. It's terrific, and I've got an enthusiastic group of 8 college age photographers, most of whom are taking their first photography course. It's a great experience for all of us living in a small Tuscan town and studying and learning together. If you have anybody in your family or anyone you know, young or old, who might be interested in spending 3 months living in a beautiful little Tuscan town and uh, learning the arts, because the program is primarily arts oriented, I'll leave a link in the podcast notes. There are a few other things I want to fill you in on, and I'll do that toward the end of our time together here. But first, I want to talk about a great email I got from longtime podcast listener Christopher Bonney. Chris wrote into the last episode of Camera Position in response to that episode, number 206, and said, I enjoyed your podcast reference to Twyla Tharp. I learned a valuable lesson from her Creative Habit book some years ago. Tharp described how, when she goes into her studio in the morning, she puts on a recording of Bach fugues. This is her signal to her brain that she's ready to be in a flow state. Chris goes on to say, when I go out to make photographs, I have a similar trick. I take a few mindless photographs to signal to my brain that I'm ready to turn observations into images. Wow, what a great phrase. Turning observations into images. And Chris, one more little bit from him. He says, we think nothing of musicians warming up before playing. I wonder what visual artists do to warm up, especially those of us whose work is more observational. So I think that's pretty interesting that Chris brought this up, because I don't know about you, but I feel the need to warm up photographically. Most of the time, I have the advantage of being able to photograph every day or nearly every day, often for extended periods of time during that day. But every so often, I'll find that I haven't picked up a camera for a few days, or God forbid, but yeah, it happens, maybe even a few weeks. And when that happens, I make sure that I do some warming up exercises. Maybe you do too. For Chris, he needs to fire off a few shots on the camera to, as he puts it, send the signal to his brain to make observations into images. Personally, I find I need a little more than that. I need to actually make myself go and be observational out there in the world somewhere. And I really actually figure that after all this time being involved in photography, I should be able to go and make good photographs just about anywhere and just about under any circumstances. So sometimes I play a little trick on myself. I'll get into the car and I'll drive for 15 minutes. Doesn't really matter which direction, though I try to go in a direction I don't normally go from where I am. I set a timer to 15 minutes, and when the timer goes off, I find a place to pull over, safely, of course. If it takes an extra minute or two, I'm not going to risk my safety, but pull over and get out of the car and spend 15 minutes photographing. Again, I use a timer and I force myself to make at least 15 to 20 photographs in that 15 minutes. More photographs is better, but keeping the time at 15 minutes is important because it kind of puts a limit on how much you can spend, how much time you can spend in that place, and kind of forces you to see during that time. If you try this, I think you'll be amazed. Well, at least I'm amazed at what I find when I have to find something. When I have to find something to photograph, that's the sort of rule I set for myself. Randomizing the location is a way to put myself into a situation that I might not otherwise be in. I had a similar situation the other day where I was in a somewhat unfamiliar place. Arezzo is a neighbor to the north here in southeastern Tuscany, not too far from Cortona. I'd been there before, but not very often, and it was raining. And I was with my photo students, and we had scheduled some time to go out and photograph together. And we had to figure out how to make photographs that spoke to our experience in that town during a dreary, rainy day. So we played and we experimented and we tried things that we might not otherwise try and that wouldn't necessarily be part of our usual visual lexicon. Slow shutter speeds, unusual vantage points, looking for splashes of color in the gray cityscape. And by making ourselves make photographs, we wound up with some images that communicated the story of that day in that place in the rain. Not only that, but as we talked about it later, we all also found the exercise quite freeing. We were able to step away at least a little bit from all the things that the students had been learning and all the things that I've practiced in my lifetime of photography. Careful control of depth of field, keeping the camera steady during long exposures, all that kind of thing. And just seeing what happened when we pointed the camera at something and released the shutter on a dark day and trying not to use super high ISOs, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a different kind of warm up for us, one that allowed us to think in a different way and imagine what's possible with photography under a different set of circumstances than all of us might prefer. Do you feel the need to warm yourself up to photograph? If so, what do you do to make that happen? What's your ritual of getting ready to be in the creative state? Let me know in an email, on the Facebook page, or for the podcasts, or in the comments below. I'm just curious to see what other people use as warm up exercises. Another note that I wanted to make here before I sign off is that over the last few weeks, I sent the information out about my 2019 Italy photography workshops to those on my mailing list. I have an advance notice mailing list. I know many of you are probably on it, and many of you probably got this email that I'm speaking about. As is typical, my alumni participants filled most of the spots immediately. About 75% of the folks who come on my workshops annually have been on at least one workshop with me before, often many more than that. I have several people who've been on a dozen or more. Something I did differently this year is that I held out one workshop week for people who haven't been able to come along on one of my Italian adventures before. The workshop will be held just across the valley from where I'm sitting in the amazingly beautiful Val d'Orcia area of Tuscany. Will be based in the picture perfect town of Pienza, which is near the great Tuscan hill towns of Montalcino, Montepulciano, Siena, and more, and we'll visit all of those places during our week. This, in fact, is the location where I've done the most workshops over the years, the 10 years now that I've been providing workshops in Italy. And man, it is such a beautiful and amazing spot. As I record this, there are just a couple of spaces left out of the total of 7 people that I have as the maximum for my workshops. I'll leave a link to the workshop on the blog page, or you can visit photographitaly.com to find out more information about how you can come and live and photograph and hone your photographic skills in Tuscany with us next June. Oh, and of course, because it's, Tuscany, we eat well and we drink great wines together too, and all of that is included in my workshops. So, warming up. Warming up. Do you warm up? Do you feel the need to get yourself in the mood, in the zone, to be able to turn observations into images? So if you do, go out there, do that warm up exercise, and let me know how it works out for you. And I'll look forward to talking with you again on the next episode of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography. Thanks for listening.